Alaska. Mr. Young.
Mr. Chairman, I rise and offer an amendment. I want to thank Mr. Calvert and his committee for the work they've done on this legislation and support the underlying bill. This amendment, as the administration has left no alternative to the people of Alaska and those of interest in our national energy policy. This spring, under this President and the Department of Interior, published a management plan for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to recommend the entirety of the area be designated as wilderness. This would include the 1002 area that was set aside by Congress for potential development in the future, an area that holds 10 billion barrels of oil at the minimum and probably 37 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. My amendment would ensure that no funds could be spent implementing this recommendation. The impact of this recommendation should not be overlooked, as the recommendation requires immediate management in the entire area as a wilderness, unilaterally undermining the role of Congress through de facto wilderness designation. This action violates the Statehood Compact, which is founded in ensuring the subsurface resources for the economic well-being of this nation. This action also violates the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which established more than 100 million acres of conservation areas. And in recognition of the size of that acreage being locked up by the Act drew a line guaranteeing that no more conservation areas can be created without an act of Congress, our role. There is no need for additional wilderness areas in ANWR, given 92% of the refuge is already closed to development. Alaska holds 53% of federal wilderness areas in the nation, and that's not enough for this administration. You think about that a moment. The administration plan immediately raises another administrative bureaucratic wall to oil and gas development. This betrayal to the Alaskan people, and I believe to this nation, to this Congress, this plan by the administration handcuffs my state from providing for itself and pushes to be more dependent on federal funds. This is not just an assault on Alaska. This is another example of executive overreach by this administration undermining the role of Congress. This is our role, not this administration. I don't care who the administration is. When the president oversteps its bound, we should take and accept our responsibility. And this is the law he cannot do. But he says, I can do it. And by the way, this was an example, I think, of this whole Department of Interior. Between EPA and the Department of Interior, they're trying to cripple this nation, trying to cripple my state. Against the law. It's very specific in ANELCA. And if you don't believe me, go back and read it. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alaska reserves his time. What purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment and claim
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment offered by my friend from Alaska would prohibit any federal funds from being used to implement the administration's revised comprehensive conservation plan to better sustain and manage the entire Arctic Wildlife Refuge. Mr. Chairman, attaching this rider to the Interior Appropriations Bill is a mistake. The coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge is one of the few remaining places in our nation that remains pristine and undisturbed. It provides critical protection for thousands of species, caribou, polar bear, gray wolves, just to name a few, and they desperately need this important habitat. Roughly 20 million acres managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are some of the best and last undisturbed natural areas in this nation. And I understand that the gentleman from Alaska feels strongly about this issue, and he's been a great advocate for his state for decades. But on this important issue, we deeply disagree. Earlier this year, the Interior Department released an updated conservation plan to better manage the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And the President took that opportunity to call on to Congress to pass legislation designating the coastal plain as a wilderness, an even greater level of protection for this incredible area. The protected area encompasses a wide range or Arctic, subarctic ecosystems, their unadulterated landforms, their native flora and fauna. The refuge has an incredible biological integrity, natural diversity, and environmental health. Now, I understand that there's differences of opinion how to manage this land, and that legislation designated in this area as wilderness may not get very far in this Congress. But I want to commend the President for his leadership on this issue, and I would hope that the legislative process could play out, and that we not adopt this rider onto this bill, because this issue is just far too important. Lastly, I would be remiss if I did not point out one more obvious truth. The President will not sign a bill loaded up with anti-environmental riders just like this one. So we only make the path for the bill harder by including it. So I hope my colleagues would join me in opposing it. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The lady from Minnesota reserves her time, or Yields back her time. Gentleman from Alaska is recognized.
I appreciate the comments for the lady. I would suggest respectfully you should follow the law. We have given up the responsibility in this Congress to the President, not just this President, other presidents. It is clear in the law nothing more than 5,000 acres can be withdrawn and put in the wilderness without the okay of the Congress in Alaska. No more clause. It stands for no more. Now, we have a president that says, up yours to the Congress. That's not the way to run this business. We have a responsibility as congressmen to do our job. And when it goes against the law through executive order, that's against this Constitution of America. I yield the gentleman to the chairman.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I certainly would urge the adoption of the gentleman's amendment, and I support his amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman from
And I
Alaska.
yield back.
Yields back his time. The question's on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alaska. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.